Hi everyone, it's Marian, and today I'll be sharing with you my starter Hoya collection. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I wouldn't consider myself a Hoya head, and if you've been watching me for a while, I mentioned that quite a few times, but looking at the number of Hoyas I currently have, it is now actually the third largest in my overall plant collection. But the reason that I would still don't consider myself a Hoya head is most of the Hoyas, actually all of the Hoyas that I have in my collection, I would consider starter Hoyas. So if you're just starting to get into Hoyas and you don't know where to start, I recommend the Hoyas that I currently have in my collection. They're very beginner friendly and a good way to learn and familiarize yourself with Hoyas first before you go buy that single leaf cutting that costs you $200. And while I don't officially consider myself a Hoya head, I definitely see the appeal of Hoyas to a lot of plant parents who make Hoyas the main or most of their plant collection. But like I said, if you're just starting to get into Hoyas, I would definitely start with the starter Hoyas first before you get to that Hoyas that you saw on Instagram that costs a lot of money. Because Hoya comes in so many different varieties, the care for them can be different from one another even though they're all Hoyas. So it's good to know the basics and understand the nature of Hoyas first with these starter Hoyas that are a little bit more easier to access, beginner friendly when it comes to care, and of course they're very budget friendly. So as I share with you my Hoya collection, I would start with the easiest and the most beginner friendly to the one that is a little bit more advanced for beginners, but overall still great starter Hoya plant. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Marian, the creator of My Oasis Life, where I take you along my plant journey and share with you some of my tips and tricks along the way, and also share with you lifestyle content that is focused on sustainability, productivity, wellness, as well as my occasional personal and travel vlog here and there. So if that type of content interests you, please do consider subscribing to my channel before the end of this video, and don't forget to like and comment down below. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So the very first one in my Hoya collection, and you can probably guess what it is the Hoya kerrii, and specifically the Hoya kerrii that is not variegated. I would definitely go for the Hoya kerrii that is non-variegated first if it is your first time taking care of Hoyas. And as you might have heard, Hoyas are succulent and succulent-like, but that is not true for a lot of Hoyas, but it's definitely true for the regular Hoya kerrii. You can pretty much take care of this like you would any other type of succulents. It doesn't need frequent watering. I probably water this once or twice a month depending on the season, and also I give it a lot of light. I would shy away though from giving this full sun like I would succulents, but indirect bright light is great for it. And what's also great for a lot of the Hoyas that I'm going to mention in this video, they can also do well with moderate light. But again, moderate light can mean very different to a lot of people. Some think moderate lighting leans more towards the low light side, some think it leans more to the bright light side. With this one, it definitely leans more to the bright light side. So just to be safe, indirect bright light for the Hoya kerrii and for a lot of the Hoyas, if not all of the Hoyas that I'm going to be mentioning in this video. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, if you've seen me talk about the Hoya kerrii, I do have a complete care guide on the Hoya kerrii that I will link up here and also down in the description. That a lot of Hoya kerrii being sold are single leaf cuttings that are not going to turn into a plant. And I don't necessarily discourage you from getting that. Just be aware that the one that you're getting is a single leaf cutting that is highly unlikely to turn into a plant. But I would still recommend getting it if you like, just to get yourself more familiar with a Hoya and see how it is like or different from a regular succulent that you might have in your plant collection. And the second starter Hoya that I'll mention, which is something people would probably recommend first, is the Hoya carnosa. And the Hoya carnosa comes in many different varieties. You can get the purely green one, and you can also get the tricolor ones, which are the ones that I have, or the one that has splashes on them. And the great thing about the Hoya carnosa, whether you get the variegated version or just the regular green version, they pretty much have the same level of care. So you just pick and choose which one you like, and I can show you the ones that I have, which is the Hoya carnosa Crimson Queen. And the way that you can tell that it is a Crimson Queen is it produces white leaves like this, and also the white variegation on the green leaves is on the outside. And it can also produce pink leaves that eventually would also turn into this white leaves. And I also find that the Hoya carnosa Crimson Queen leaves tend to be a little bit whiter compared to the Crimson Princess, which I have next. So this one is my Hoya Crimson Princess, and I did get this as a large plant from the big box stores, and this is the one that you would commonly find in a Lowe's or a Home Depot or any big box stores for a really good price. And I think now the 6 to 8 inch pots that you would find in big box stores is around $20. When I got this, it was probably around $13 or $15 a couple years ago. And what I love about the Hoya Crimson Princess is it is the opposite of the Hoya Crimson Queen, where you can find a variegation inside of the leaf instead of the outer rim. But unlike the Hoya Crimson Queen, it doesn't produce purely white leaves for me, at least not for the plant that I have, but it can produce leaves that are completely green, which is your standard Hoya carnosa. And it can also produce leaves that have like splashes like this, which kind of makes it more like your Hoya publicalis, and also makes a great Hoya starter plant if you're looking for something that's trails instead of something that grows up like the Hoya kerrii. And because this is a pretty large plant, this is actually my largest trailing and hanging plant, not just for my Hoya collection. So I only water this once a month. And that's what's great about Hoya carnosa tricolors, whether it's the Crimson Princess or the Crimson Queen. They make great hanging plants, and unlike the pothos, I don't have to water them as frequently. My pothos plants that I have hanging on the wall, I water them pretty much once a week, and this one I water once a month, and usually at the beginning of the month, which is right about now. So let me show you how I water and take care of this plant on a monthly basis. Since I only water this plant once a month, I do take it, bring it down from the wall, put it in the bathtub in the bathroom so that I could wash the foliage and not just water it. And since I only water it once a month, I know it has gathered a lot of dust on its foliage, so I want to make sure I wash the dust off and any possible pests that might be hiding or lurking in the leaves. But so far I never had any problems with mealybugs or anything in my Hoya Crimson Princess. And after that, I do water it. I normally bottom water, but I am top watering with my Hoya Crimson Princess just because it is a larger plant. It is still in the wild grow planter, so anything that is getting drained out is still kind of getting bottom watered up as I do this, and I just let it sit for a few minutes up to an hour, and then I'm going to take it out, let it dry, and then put it back up in the wall. So that's it, pretty easy. And next one on my starter Hoya list is my Hoya compacta. And this one I believe is still very much related to the Hoya carnosas that I just mentioned, but this one is a little bit trickier when it comes to care because of the shape of the leaves, and it is, as the name suggests, a little bit more compact, so it's kind of harder to tell when it needs water. And the way I determine that it needs water is the leaf itself, not just how it curls, but the actual leaf itself has wrinkles on it. And that's how I know that this is due for watering. But once you figure that out and you know when to water your Hoya compacta, this is a pretty much easy care plant, and also in my experience propagates very easily. I started out with a very small cutting of this, and now it is like this. It is a very slow growing plant compared to other Hoyas that are already slow growing plants, but for some people that could be a positive thing. For me, definitely it is a positive thing because I get to keep the plant, or I also get to add the plant to my collection without it taking much space or being worried that down the road that I have to transplant this or find a bigger spot for it because it has grown so much. And this one I already had for like almost 3 years now, maybe even more. But like I said, I only started with probably this much of a cutting, and it has grown this much since. Okay, so once you got the regular Hoya kerrii and the Hoya carnosas down, then I would definitely go venture onto the variegated versions of the Hoya kerrii if you really like them. And I do love my Hoya kerrii, so I do try to collect as many of the varieties it has. And this one is the reverse variegata, and this one is the albo marginata. With the reverse variegata, as you can see, it's still very much green. So after the regular Hoya kerrii, if you get the Hoya kerrii reverse variegata, you probably wouldn't have much difficulty in taking care of this one, as this is still a very green plant. I mean, if you look at Instagram, there are Hoya kerrii reverse variegatas that have a little bit more lighter variegation on them, And with this one, I only see the lighter variegation after the leaf comes out, but eventually once the leaf matures, it also kind of fades into this very green color. With the albo marginata, however, it does keep that yellow variegation, and in some cases it can produce leaves that are completely yellow, which makes it a little bit more tricky plant to take care of. And I honestly actually killed my very first albo marginata, and I got this one about late last year. And this is currently a single leaf cutting. I was told that this is a single leaf cutting with a node, so it will eventually grow into a plant, but I haven't seen evidence of that yet. And I also haven't repotted this to actually find out if it has a node. And the reason I haven't done that is a lot of Hoyas hates getting repotted, and if you repot them too frequently, or if you repot them when you just got them, that usually ends your plant dying. And I have experience with a couple of Hoyas, like the Hoya kentiana or Hoya variegata, that I repotted way too soon the moment I've gotten it, and it has died out. So you have to be careful when you get the albo marginata to not do the same. And kind of like the same thing happened with my very first albo marginata that I got from a Thailand import. I've also been repotting that way too often. I also overwatered it and it died. And this can die very easily. It will die overnight if you don't take care of it properly. So just be careful with the albo marginata version of the Hoya kerrii. But if you want to venture into the variegated versions of the kerrii, I would suggest going with the reverse variegata first. I do have 3 more starter Hoyas that I'm going to talk about, and the next one is the Hoya curtisii. And the Hoya curtisii have been popping up in big box stores, so if you're lucky enough to find one, go get it, because you are able to get it in a much larger pot. When I got this as part of my Thailand import, and I only got a few cuttings of it that I had to propagate and grow myself. And the great thing about the Hoya curtisii, though, it is a very resilient Hoya, and not a lot of Hoyas, especially if you import them, do well over import. But I do find the Hoya curtisii, even though it looks like a delicate plant, it did survive the importation pretty well. But I might just have gotten lucky, so don't take my word for it. If you can find this in your local nursery or in the big box stores, it would be better for you to buy them locally instead of importing them. The Hoya curtisii makes a great alternative to plants like the string of hearts, which I love, but I do think the Hoya curtisii is actually an easier care plant than the string of hearts. It is a much slower grower, but I think it grows pretty much the same pace as the string of hearts variegata, and I have just recently upgraded it to this pot, and I did so very carefully, knowing that Hoyas hate getting repotted, and I immediately placed it in the prop box. But as you can see, I did have some yellow leaves at the bottom here and there, but so far it has survived the transplant process. But what I love about the Hoya curtisii, like I said, is the shape of the leaves. It's not exactly heart shape, but it is round with a pointed tip, and it has speckles on it that actually reminds me of not just the string of hearts, but the Peperomia prostata. So if you're looking for a Hoya that has smaller foliage, I definitely recommend the Hoya curtisii to start with. And we're almost in the final stretch, and the second to the last starter Hoya that I would recommend is the Hoya compacta variegata. And again, if you're fortunate enough to find this in the big box stores, you can find it in a 6 or even 8-inch pot at the same price as a regular Hoya compacta that you also find at the big box stores. So if you're lucky, go grab it. If you're able to snag a big pot of the Hoya compacta variegata, it actually becomes a lot easier care plant because you have a lot more of the plant to play with. But when I got my Hoya compacta in a plant shop in Chicago, it was in a 3-inch pot. It had like maybe 3 to 5 cuttings in it, but only one survived. The thing about variegated Hoya plants, especially when you only have very few cuttings of it, they are very sensitive to transport and transplanting, which happened to this one. I'm fortunate enough that I actually had a cutting that survived, unlike my Hoya kentiana variegata that I bought at the same time as this one. It completely died out, but that one I only had about like 1 or 2 cuttings of it, and they just didn't survive the transport and transplant process after I've gotten them. So again, if you were able to get a big pot of this in your big box store or in your local plant shop, then you have better chances of keeping this plant alive. So even if you lose like 1 or 2, you still have the rest of the plant to play with. But if you're only getting a small pot of this or a cutting of this, then this becomes a tricky plant to take care of. So just be careful and pay a little bit more attention to it than you would your other Hoya plants. And the last Hoya plant in my collection that I would consider a starter Hoya, the Hoya fishtail. And I know this is still uncommon. Back then, this was considered rare and very hard to find. And this can still pack a price even now, but it's not as crazy as the prices that it used to carry just a couple years ago. And what makes the Hoya polyneura or Hoya fishtail different from the other plants in my Hoya starter collection is the foliage of the Hoya fishtail looks a lot more like a regular green foliage plant than it is a Hoya wax plant that has that thicker, more supple leaves. So with this one, it would require a lot more watering compared to the other Hoyas that I've shown you, but also still be careful with its watering because it is still a Hoya. And with this one, I would consider it as a starter plant because I do think it propagates very easily. I got this as a single leaf cutting from a trade. So I got this about late October, early November last year. And now as of filming this, it is the first week of March and it has grown this much and I never really had any problems with its propagation process. The moment I've gotten it from the person I traded with, I just kept it in the container that she gave me. It was wrapped in moss. I put it in my IKEA greenhouse cabinet and then in a prop box. And then a few months later, it is this. And like I said, it's very easy to propagate. It grows pretty fast compared to my other Hoyas and it looks so pretty. So if you already have gone through the Hoya carnosas or the typical wax plant and you want to venture into the more uncommon or rare side of Hoyas, I would definitely start with the Hoya polyneura, Hoya fishtail. Like I said, it can still pack quite a price, but not as much as it used to. And it's also easier care compared to other uncommon or rare Hoyas. And that's my entire Hoya collection that I consider great starter Hoyas. And if you have any other Hoyas that you think are great for beginners, please share them down in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new here, please do subscribe. I come up with videos every week. And if you haven't yet, check out these videos up here until my next one. But until then, I see you. I appreciate you. Take care of yourself and each other and have a plentiful day. Bye.